Welcome back to the Impact Podcast by Innerspace, where we explore the intersection of workplace, people, and performance. I'm your host, Jennifer Shannon, and today's guest is someone who has been shaping the conversation around the future of work long before it became a headline topic. Kay Sargent is the Director of Thought Leadership for Interiors at HOK and is a globally recognized expert in workplace strategy and design. She's also the author of a new book, Designing Neuro Inclusive Workplaces, which explores how the spaces we create can better support cognitive diversity, well-being, and performance. The book brings together years of research and real-world application, showing how even small changes in the built environment can have a significant impact on how people think, feel, and work. What's compelling about Kay's work is that it challenges a lot of conventional thinking, not just about design, but about how organizations approach people. Her perspective is grounded, pragmatic, and refreshingly honest, especially when it comes to hybrid work and what's actually working versus what just sounds good in theory. Kay, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And God, I love the fact you said refreshingly honest. I don't think a lot of people find honesty refreshing, but okay. I love the fact that you do. So let's go.
Oh
Let's do it.
boy, do I find honesty refreshing. Something that is very interesting to me, because certainly this is the case for myself, and people's careers are very rarely linear. And I know that you have spent years advising organizations on how to align their workplace strategy with how
Right.
people actually work across, globally and in different operating models. And I wonder if maybe you could walk us briefly through your journey about what drew you to this space, and particularly your focus on the intersection of people, place, and performance.
Yeah. Wow. Well, be careful what you ask for. Okay. So, I've been a practicing designer for 40 years, but I
Wow.
really started designing house plans when I was a kid for my parents and their parties. And I went to school and really studied that, came out of school I probably worked for probably only about 5 or 6 companies in my entire career. But I've gone through a journey of being, at one point early in my career, maybe 10 plus years in, was working on 3 or 4 of the largest projects that were happening in Washington, D.C., and very, very involved in that. I started one of the first CAD departments in Washington, D.C., because when I was in college, I got to use a computer because I was working at a dealership. And at that time, nobody had a computer. So joined a firm and started their CAD department, and then decided I didn't want to be stuck doing that forever. So I went to the next firm and pretended that I didn't know how to use a computer. So I wasn't just having to do, CAD drafting all day. And through my career, it has morphed and evolved a variety of ways. I was involved very early with ADA and spent a lot of time going around the country, investigating and doing assessments. I'm very involved in environmental planning, which is something I studied at Parsons in New York. I'm very involved in security design in the 90s and designed a lot of high security spaces in the 80s and the 90s, like for a lot of government agencies and regional emergency management control centers. I did a lot of master planning for large companies and corporations, and then really got into a lot of the workplace strategy because I wanted to have answers. And I really thought there was a science behind what we do. This is just not random, the recommendations we're making. There is kind of weight behind this. And that intersection of design and workplace strategy really kind of leaned into human-centric design, and that kind of evolved over time. And then about 10 years ago, I had a client who really was focused on we're delivering their portfolio all around the world. So, got to travel around the world. And they asked about, how do you design for someone that's neurodiverse? And I didn't have a great answer, and I wanted to have a better answer. So I think what has kind of guided my career is my curiosity and willingness to say yes.
That is so, for starters, I think we need to have a whole separate podcast where we talk about that journey, because Parsons, like, you are a pioneer. Holy smokes, that's an incredible career journey. And that curiosity is one of my favorite traits in people, because a curious person seeks to understand, and then they're just my favorite kind of people. I love it.
Yeah.
It's so great. I know that you've had a front row seat into how workplace strategy has evolved over the years, given your experience and your education, especially over the last, let's say, 5 or 6 years, with the shift to hybrid work.
Mm.
And looking at the last few years in particular, what do you think are some of the biggest shifts that you've observed in the way organizations think about work, in particular hybrid work?
Okay, we could have a whole 2-hour conversation about that, but I'll try to say really high level. So
Okay,
first of
sure.
all, remote working is it new? We've been able to work remotely for a long time. I think there were a whole lot of people though that didn't necessarily understand or embrace it, and I think it forced a lot of people to kind of rethink what we assumed work had to be. At the same time, there were a whole lot of people that fancied themselves as experts in this topic. Everybody now has an opinion on this. Some of them are not as well informed as others, but it's. I think it's really interesting just to kind of get the different perspectives. I think that people forget that we weren't 100% occupied before COVID even happened. The office never really has been. But now all of a sudden, I think all of the heads of corporate real estate are kind of under a microscope. And I think, quite frankly, they're being set up for failure because there are many different things that go into a successful work environment. Management, having rules and the processes and things that are clearly laid out, the space, a whole variety. In fact, early on, we said, here are the 12 things that help create a successful hybrid program. Only 5 have to do with space. 7 of them have to do with management and communications and all of those other things. And so, yes, space is a big part of that, but it is not the only thing. We think right now there's a lot of really bad habits and behaviors that people have adopted, and no space can correct that. No space can correct a bad manager. No space can correct a toxic culture. So it's it's an interesting conversation, and I don't think we're ever going to go back to being 100% in the office. But there's a nuance here, and I think for a long time it was either you either were for remote work or you were for everybody having to be in the office. And quite frankly, I think the right answer for a lot of companies is somewhere in the middle, but it's different for every company. We always try to find the easy button that's the answer for everybody, and we got to let go of that notion because one size misfits all.
And I couldn't agree with you more. Something that I think as I watch, or as we in particular at Interspace, we're watching people try and figure out, organizations are trying to figure out how this works. And on that notion of hybrid, you have said that hybrid itself isn't broken, but the way that you're implementing it is. I'm wondering if you could break down for us what that looks like in practice, because I think that's an interesting nuance that it's not the policy, it's the implementation.
Yeah, and I think it's just, in many cases, it's the randomness. Look, I think at the end of all of this, we're going to look back on this and say this was a failure of communication and a failure of leadership. People weren't giving clear objectives. They weren't basing what they were doing on any scientific backup. And I think we really need to understand, what is it that you value? If your company values people that are doing intense thought and generating certain types of things, you may not have to be in the office to do that. If you value transfer of knowledge and ideas that germinate and kind of like take root and kind of grow because you're putting them in these little incubators where people are thinking together, then the office becomes pretty important. If you value mentorship and people challenging each other, etc., there are certain things that are much easier to do in person than it is remotely, and vice versa. And so I think we really need to have a deeper understanding of what people are doing, what a company values, and then design the solution around that and be very, very clear about what the objectives are, where the guardrails are, and communicate that.
Yeah. And there's something I read that you had said, and I think that this is really interesting because we see this playing out a lot. There's this report on, this company has a new RTO policy, or this person has this company has a new hybrid working policy. But you've made the point, and I think this is really interesting, that policy without purpose doesn't work. And I just want to dig into what you just previously said, which is, what does that purpose actually look like? So you mentioned like the kinds of work or what you're expecting from people,
Yeah.
and where that needs to be done. But What does purpose actually look like when it comes to workplace strategy?
Okay, so um, I'm going to take a company. I'm not going to name the company, but you might be able to figure out who I'm talking about. There's a very large company that when they announced that they were going to bring everybody back 5 days a week, people revolted and people were just like, okay, this is just, big company X being horrible to their employees. What we know from a lot of the conversations that we're having with C-suite is in many cases, it's because there's a dichotomy and silos being created in their organizations. There's a certain part of people that have to show up every single day, and then there's this whole group of other people that don't. And it starts to kind of create the haves and the have-nots, and it starts to become, silos within that organization that are never healthy. In some cases, it was because of policies. There are many companies that are being given massive tax incentives to be in certain areas because they're going to bring the population there. And so these jurisdictions have built infrastructure and businesses to support them, and then they didn't show up. And that had a massive impact on the economy of that area and kind of broke the contract that they had with those regions. In other cases, it's because companies found, all right, well, you can be productive at home, but you're spending a lot of time on Zoom calls, and most people are multitasking while they're on all of these calls, and the quality of what was being produced dropped. And they didn't want to say that out loud because that's never good for the share price. But in reality, I think in many cases, that's what was happening. Or the lack of the ability to transfer knowledge from one group of people to another, and or the synergy or the connection. So I think we need to really when we think about what is your purpose, again, what is it that you value? Do most companies value people coming in, sitting at a spot, trying to ignore everybody else and just answering emails 60% of the day? I'm going to argue most companies probably don't value that, but that's what a lot of their employees are doing because the space is designed to support that kind of activity versus if what you value is collaboration or training or mentoring or transfer of knowledge or ideation, is the majority of your space designed to support that type of activity? Or if you value heads down, concentrated focus and the ability to do that, right? Like, are you creating spaces that support your purpose, your values? And I think in many cases, the answer is no. They're designed as people warehouses where you're just coming in and you're sitting isolated. And then we're surprised when that's what people are doing.
People warehouses. Ooh, the cubicle wasteland. It's true. That's such a good point. Um, One of the things I found, really interesting about your book is that you're making a compelling case for neuro-inclusive workplace design. What do you think organizations still misunderstand about what neurodiversity in the workplace, and why is that becoming such an important consideration in workplace strategy today? Why do you think that's evolving?
Yeah, well, I will just say this. I don't know a single person on the planet that isn't impacted by sound, light, temperature, noise, visual distractions. I don't know a single person that thinks exactly like somebody else cognitively, right? And so I think we are ignoring who we truly are as people, and we're putting people in environments where they are just being assaulted by sensory stimulation. And in many cases, those spaces don't support how they cognitively process or communicate or just, kind of like take in information. And so we're not setting them up for success. And what might be annoying for someone who is neurotypical can be debilitating for someone that is neurodivergent. But we are all being impacted by the environments that we're in. When you physically walk into a space, you have a reaction to that space before you can even process or think about why, right? And so we're about to come out with a whole new piece around neurosthetics and how important it is in an increasingly concrete jungle world that we live in, where we feel just, you know, very disconnected from nature and we don't have a sense of calm and we feel very overwhelmed. How do we create spaces that celebrate beauty, that celebrate who we are, that celebrate nature and make us feel more at ease, more comfortable? I'm going to take you back to high school, and I apologize for this, but
Oh,
as
no, please do.
Matlock's hierarchy of needs. If your basic needs aren't met, you cannot achieve anything at a higher level, right? You really need to focus in on, do people feel safe? Do they have emotional safety and psychological safety in these spaces? Can they focus? Can they rest? Can they feel like they are taken care of? And in many environments, our spidey senses are just constantly going off because we're constantly being assaulted by all kinds of things. And we've gotten so used to that that we will put up with horrific situations. And the bottom line is, we don't have to. And those horrific situations are having an impact on our mental health, our ability to focus, our level of engagement, all of those things. And I don't know a single company that isn't trying to address that right now.
Yeah.
So anything and everything that we can do from a built environment standpoint to help have a positive impact on people, I think we have a moral obligation to do.
I also love how you're thinking about this holistically, right? So you've spoken, and I think there is this thing. I think we've all been in the situation lately, the open concept office, where I will admit 100% that I was an egregious participant in an open office in the sense that I was in marketing and communications, so
Mm,
talking and sharing, and and I could see that people in other departments were like, please, like, no headphones can help me here, right?
right.
And I like this idea that that neuro inclusive design is not just about creating special places or spaces rather, or for certain individuals, but it's about designing for everyone better in the space. And how do you see that philosophy changing the way organizations are thinking about workplace experience, productivity, employee well-being moving forward? Like this notion of, it's not just for specific people that have ADHD or some other not just the neurodivergent crowd, but what about the thinking about it holistically, the entire team?
Right. I think more and more companies are starting to realize, number one, that they have a lot of people that are already working for them that might be neurodivergent, and that even if you're not neurodivergent, you're not immune to the environment that you're in, and that it is having an impact. And the question is it having a positive impact or a negative impact? And I think, you can go ask anybody who's ever done a post-occupancy evaluation, what are the biggest challenges? You could probably ask anybody on the street, and they would tell you sound, lighting, and temperature probably are the three biggest challenges, and they would be correct, because those tend to be the things, followed by, densification, or how close you are to other people, confinement, transitions, a whole variety of things that we've studied. And we know this, but we keep designing offices that really don't support that. And I think we've just gotten in this rut. We've been talking for the last 6 years about, actually 7, because we started before the pandemic, about, is this our industry's Kodak moment? Do we just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again because that's just the way we've always done it, under knowing that it isn't really working? And when do we just stop and say, okay, wait a minute, let's just pause for a minute. Can people really get into space as quickly as they need to? Can they get out of it as quickly as they need to? Is it as sustainable as we need it to be? Is it really well suited to meet their physical and their emotional and their cognitive and their sensory needs? And I think most people would argue, yeah, no. But then why aren't we doing something about it? And there is a way. We need to demand better. And I think this whole movement now about human-centric design is, we kind of forgot who we're designing for. We're designing for people, and that is the biggest asset. I mean, companies who talk about how expensive real estate is, 90% of most companies' money is going to their people, maybe 80 to 90%, right? It's going to their people. And if we're doing anything in the space to negatively impact those people's ability to function at a higher level, we could cost a company more money than saving them by squeezing them in. Now, that could change as we have rapidly evolving technology that will change the dynamics in the office. But at this point, people are still the biggest asset, and that's ultimately who we are designing for. We're not designing for the machines. We're not just, we are designing for people.
Yeah. From a purely design perspective, what does it actually mean to create environments that support different kinds of work. So whether it's, your focus or collaboration, or you need to connect with someone one on one, like how should organizations be thinking about that balance and its effects on things like productivity and employee experience? Like what does that look like in terms of designing?
Well, I'll tell you what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like one size fits all, right? Like for so long, we have kind of designed for the average person doing the average thing. I don't even know who that person is anymore. I don't know what the average thing is. I don't know who the average person is. And most offices are playing to the middle. They're not playing to, to any of the ends. And I think we are missing a whole group of people who need more space, need less stimulation, some need more stimulation, et cetera. And so we would say that options, choice, and some degree of control can be really important. You might want to listen to music. I might need headphones. Somebody else may not want that on their ears, and so they want earplugs or buds. And other people just want like that general chatter. Like we are all unique and different. And if everybody has to have the exact same thing, then you're going to leave a lot of people out because you're playing to that very specific middle and you're not going to hit a lot of the individuals. So you don't want to have too many crazy options and choices. Okay, that's visual clutter and chaos and overwhelming. It's variety anxiety. But you want to have things that are purposely designed so that if I need a moment of quiet, I can go over to this space that was designed for that, that isn't right next to a loud space. And I can have that moment where I can just kind of focus and get away from the sound. And I'm visually signaling other people that I don't want to be bothered. But if I'm in a great mood or I'm in the middle of something and I need answers, I might want to be right in the middle of everything, and interacting and changing. So it's really about creating different zones that cater to different tasks and potentially different sensory and cognitive needs.
Along those same lines, as someone who has worked in startup quite a bit in my career, I can tell you that the perks of working for startups, whether it's the PS5 room or whatever, you have challenged the idea that workplace experience is driven by amenities and perks, and instead pointed to control as a primary driver. And I'm wondering if you could talk us through a bit more about how agency plays such a central role in employee satisfaction and performance.
Well, first of all, I think one of the things that's really, really important is authenticity. Okay, so uh, you know, was- I'm old enough to remember where the game room even started. So when AOL first came out in the 80s, nobody wanted to work for a tech company. Everybody wanted to work for big banks. That was like the stable thing. That's who you wanted to work for. And they couldn't hire the right type of people that were coming out of college that understood and had computer skills because most people in the workforce didn't, right? So they had to target those grads. And so when they were trying to recruit them on college campuses, they realized, wow, these college campus rooms, like this is like where a lot of the buzz is happening. And maybe if we design our space to look more like this, it'll be an easier jump for them to go from college to us versus going like right into like a Wall Street bank, right? And so that it is in a sense kind of where some of that did came from. And so to see it be put in spaces where it's not really authentic, like a law firm that has billable hours, et cetera. Not that you can't have some space like that, but it's very different, right? And so I think it's really important for us to understand what is the intent of some of these spaces and what is authentic and create spaces that are authentic to the organization that we're designing it for. Once you've done that, then I think it's really important to kind of tailor into the behaviors that they want. I think a lot of people made a mistake of copying the amenities of some of the tech companies. And let's just be honest. I mean, some of those tech companies are designing space where people will never leave. They want you to be there like 24 hours because their churn is fast. And so they're trying to get as much out of you as they can as quickly as possible because you're just going to like jump. So, we're going to feed you 3 times a day. We're going to build apartments that don't even have kitchens because we want you to stay at the office, et cetera. If you are a company that's like an S&T company and it takes, multiple years to discover something and you don't want to be losing people, then that's not the type of amenities you want. You might want to have a little bit more work-life balance. You might want to have, rather than 3 meals a day, it might be 2 meals. And the third one you can pick up and bring home to your family because I want you fresh tomorrow. I'm not trying to burn you out. I'm not trying to get you to be here 24 hours a day. I want you to be here for the long term. So you need to tailor things to what are the objectives and the values and the purpose and what are you trying to achieve. I think we are so focused on what everybody else is doing that we're forgetting who we potentially are. And it's like we're all going and getting dressed in somebody else's closet versus getting dressed in our own closet.
Yeah, geez, I love that. And along those same lines, because you could be mimicking someone and putting in all of these amenities, and your employees or your teams are like, couldn't care less. Where do you see the biggest gap between what employees are actually asking for and what leaders believe that they want?
I think there's a whole thing around amenities, and look, amenities are important, but I think it's about having the right amenities. But I also think people want spaces that feel more human. And so even before COVID, we started to see a big push towards hospitality. Okay, so let's just back up for a minute. 15 years ago, if I were to walk into a bank, I'd know it was a bank. 15 years ago, if I walked into a hotel lobby, I would know that. Today, we are fusing spaces. We're bringing in elements. And so there are many times that I'm standing in a space that if I didn't know where I was, I'd like, is this a lobby of a hotel or is this, a corporate like social hub? You're starting to fuse those things together. And I think as humans, we want spaces that we feel comfortable in, that aren't overly corporate, that aren't stale, that aren't so perfectly designed. And if I put anything on the wall, I have to, oh my God, I have to make sure that everything is gone. Like we want spaces that we can explore, get messy. If you want people to innovate, give them spaces where they can do that. And they're not having to, okay, now, ding, your time is up. Everything comes off the wall, clean it. Somebody else is coming in, you're out, right? We have to create a little bit of garagification. We have to create spaces that feel more natural. We were really good at bringing the office to our house. Let's bring a little bit of the house or hospitality into the office. And so we've seen this big movement. And I think what's fascinating to us is the more we go high tech, the more we go high touch. People don't feel comfortable in sterile, robotic, metal, void of any stimulation environments. That's not how we function as humans. And so, we've seen this huge rise in the maker movement, in biophilia, in neuroaesthetics, in more natural organic things, in more personalization, things like that bring a little bit of heart and soul. And I think the other thing is just spaces that reflect the mission and the brand.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because you're right. When I walk into a space, I want to feel like I'm immersed in that. Like I want to know about the company just by what I'm seeing, right? Like there's a lot to gain from that, what they value, what they care about, the way people are working. And it's true. I totally agree with you. Um, a lot of, people are implementing changes, or, I spoke about this in a previous episode, they're going on vibes to make these changes. I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit about how organizations are measuring the impact of the changes they're making, because, obviously Innerspace is extremely avid about leveraging utilization data as an example.
Mhm.
But I wonder how you are seeing your clients measure the impact of these changes to make sure that they're making the right ones, that they're impactful, that they are having the desired or intended impact on their teams.
Yeah. I don't think we're really good at that as a industry. And I'm going to say, and I'm going to be an equal opportunity offender here, so I apologize in advance. I think there's a lot of people that are leveraging sensor information because we can, and we're collecting information. And the question is, a lot of people don't even know what to do with the information that they have, and what does that actually really tell you, right? And so, if you just want to know, are people in the building? Okay, Bad Swipe will do that. If you want to know what they're doing, or if they're happy doing it, or that's a very different process and a very different way that you need to go about it. And I think a lot of people right now are collecting data and saying, okay, this is what our people are doing. So when we go to design something new, we're going to take that information, we're going to use it because this is what people are doing. This is what we should be designing for. And I'm going to argue, are they actually doing what you want them to do? Because I'm going to say in many cases, I don't think they are. I think we've gotten into a lot of really bad habits, and that we need to be thinking about, what do we want people to do? What do we not want them to do? And how do we break them of that habit? I mean, you can go to almost any office, and there are 5 people all in the same call, sitting in an open office all together, but not together, like at their desk, and they're all multitasking and doing something, and they're half listening to the call, and they're creating sounds and noise that are reverberating and like irritating people in that space. I mean, all of that is just bad behavior. And so the sensors are going to tell you, well, this is what people are doing, but it is not what we want them to be doing. And so I think we need to get a lot better at asking better questions, because a lot of questions are really bad. And we need to ask people and really kind of observe and understand why. I think it's what we're going to call thick data versus thin data. Thin data might be a single data point. Thick data tells you, okay, why? Why are people doing that? Or why is that conference room not being used? Or why is that desk not being used? And really having a deeper understanding so that you can make better, smarter choices.
Okay, I love that, because that thick data is where the curiosity sits, right? Like, I love that. I love that, challenge yourself, challenge your organization to be curious about that why. I
Yeah.
love that thick and thin data. It's so easy to be able to
Well, and
visualize.
I'll give you a great example of it. I can't tell you how many times we're called and say, we're out of conference rooms, we need more space. Or today, we don't have enough desks for everybody. We called everybody back. We don't have enough desks. And then you walk around and it's like half these desks are empty. Like, what do you mean? Oh, well, she's just away from her desk right now, right? When you go to a restaurant, you don't put your stuff down and claim the desk or the restaurant table for the entire evening. You go, you use it, you take your stuff, you go, you leave. It's freed for somebody else. But people are going in and like putting a coffee cup down, or maybe my bag, and then disappearing for 4 or 5 hours. And then other people are coming in and saying, well, there's no space for me to sit. Yeah, there is. It's just being used as a closet for somebody who isn't sitting there right now, right? And so I think there's a lot of really bad behavior that we need to get used to. Or we have clients that, they'll say there's no conference rooms, and we walk around and they're like, they're all empty. What do you mean? And it's like, oh, well, they're booked. But then they're not freed up. Or there's one person in a room designed for 10 because they're squatting in a room because there's no focus areas, right? So whether it's misuse, whether it's something else, and just going and getting and seeing it from a different data point, even just observation, can fill in the blanks that will really tell you what's going on.
Yeah, oh, I love that. Yeah. We have a little tradition here at the Impact Podcast where we just do a couple of rapid fire off the top of your head questions to end. So,
Okay.
all right. So, the biggest reason that hybrid strategies fail.
Because they're mandated without clearly communicating why we want you there, and they don't follow up on the guidelines and the rules.
The one thing that leaders can do immediately to improve their workplace design or their approach to workplace design.
Take yourself out of the pocket. If people are coming in to be with each other and to have access to leaders, then make yourself accessible. Don't sit out over in a corner and never come out of your office, because don't argue, I have to be here so I can learn from you if I don't ever have access to you.
Good one. One assumption about the future of work that needs to be challenged.
Wow, there are so many, but I think the biggest one I'm going to say is that it's going to be just like what we experienced. I think the younger generation is looking at a very different reality, not only from a time standpoint, from a longevity standpoint, from tools, from continual learning, from change. Very, very different than what we have encountered over the last 40 years. And I think people need to understand my experience is not going to be potentially theirs. Be sympathetic to that.
Wow, good advice. That wraps another incredible episode of the Impact Podcast. I think one of the biggest takeaways from today's conversation is that creating better workplaces is not about adding more perks or enforcing stricter policies. It's about designing environments that genuinely support how people work, think, collaborate, and thrive. We also explored the idea that flexibility without intention can quickly become fragmentation, and that organizations need to be far more thoughtful about how they balance purpose, autonomy, employee experience, and performance in the workplace. Kay also shared with us some incredibly important perspectives on neuro inclusion and why designing for a broad range of human needs ultimately creates better experiences for everyone, not just specific groups of employees. As organizations continue navigating hybrid work and evolving employee expectations, these conversations are only becoming more important. If you'd like to dive deeper into Kay's work, including the research and ideas that we discussed today, you can find her book linked in the description of the podcast here. It is called Designing Neuro Inclusive Workplaces, and we'll make sure that we have the link so you can grab that book. A huge thank you to you, Kay, for joining us and sharing some really thoughtful and practical insights into the future of workplace strategy and neuro inclusive design. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider sharing the episode with your network or send it to a colleague who is rethinking how their workplace supports people and performance. You have been listening to the Impact Podcast by Innerspace. I'm your host, Jennifer Shannon. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.